अस्सलाम वालेकुम शहजाद साहब। अस्सलाम वालेकुम। क्लास अटेंड जो है आप कर रहे हैं। शहजाद साहब जब आप रेडी हो शुरू कर सकते हैं। बहुत शुक्रिया।
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, my dear participants. We are about to begin our session today, and there has been a gap of a couple of weeks, and hope we can resume in the same way that we were discussing various things in our previous sessions. I'd like to suggest a small change in the format of our sessions so that we can also include some texts which we might also find very important in studying Islam. And for this, I'd like to make this change in the format is that in the first session, we shall discuss three different texts from sources. One of them will be a text from the Quran, another will be a text from Hadith, and still another will be a text from the Bible. And these three texts will be read out to you. You can also find them being displayed before you on the screen. And it would be in the fitness of things that if we start off, of course, with the Quran, in the next session, this will form the part of our first session. And as usual, in the next session, we shall discuss some of the common misconceptions which prevail in the name of Islam. Now, to start off, we have chosen this verse from Surah Shura of the Quran, and as you can see, it is called the Quranic verse of the day. I'm going to read out the text and translation of the verse before you, and then discuss slightly some of the areas in which we might need more discussion and clarification. So the verse goes like this: وَجَزَاءُ سَيِّئَةٍ سَيِّئَةٌ مِثْلُهَا فَمَنْ عَفَا وَأَصْلَحَ فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الظَّالِمِينَ وَلَمَنِ انتَصَرَ بَعْدَ ظُلْمِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ مَا عَلَيْهِم مِّن سَبِيلٍ إِنَّمَا السَّبِيلُ عَلَى الَّذِينَ يَظْلِمُونَ النَّاسَ وَيَبْغُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ وَلَمَنْ صَبَرَ وَغَفَرَ إِنَّ ذَلِكَ لَمِنْ أَزْمِ الْأُمُورِ. And a translation of this text is that, and the revenge of an evil is an evil equal to it. Yet he who forgave and reconciled, his reward rests with God. Indeed, he does not like wrongdoers. And those who took revenge after they were oppressed, then there is no blame on them. The blame is only on them who oppress people and are rebellious in the land without justification. It is for these people for whom there is a grievous penalty. And indeed, he who exercised restraint and forgave, then this is from among the matters of resolve. So, dear participants, as you can see, today's verse basically relates to the issue of forgiveness and to the issue of the fact that when we commit something wrong, when we are guilty of oppressing some other people, then what is the conduct that we should adopt? And at the same time, if we are guilty or if we are the people who are oppressed from the other side, then what are the rights of a person who is oppressed? How far can he retaliate? What are the limits and bounds which he must or she must not cross? So the Quran says that the revenge of an evil is an evil equal to it. So if you have been wrong in some way, if someone has, for example, slapped you, or if someone has said bad words to you, you can inflict an equal wrong on that person. Of course, that wrong will be still a wrong, but the fact is that it will not be liable before the Almighty. If you do something in retaliation, and if you do something which is equal in retaliation to what has been done to you, this, of course, would not be held culpable, will not be held accountable by the Almighty. However, the Quran says that the more cherished thing and the more refined thing is that you forgive the other person. So therefore it says, فَمَنْ عَفَا وَأَصْلَحَ فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. And this is no mean a reward. The verse says that person who forgave the other person and also reconciled, then this would entail that his reward actually rests with the Almighty. And now this is a huge incentive that if we forgive, then our reward rests with the Almighty. Our reward will be given by the Almighty. And when Almighty is the being who is going to give us the reward, then one can only imagine the extent and the nature of that reward. And the verse goes on to say, إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الظَّالِمِينَ, that the Almighty does not like people who transgress, people who cross limits, which means that, of course, if you have been wronged, if some bad thing has been inflicted upon you, you cannot cross the limits and do something which is more evil than the evil was that was inflicted upon you. You can only do something which is equal in proportion, which is commensurate to the wrong that was done against you. And then the verse says, وَلَمَنِ انْتَصَرَ بَعْدَ ظُلْمِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ مَا عَلَيْهِم مِّن سَبِيلٍ. It further stresses, and those who took revenge after they were oppressed, there is no blame on them. In other words, taking revenge is a possibility. It's something which is allowed. It is something which is always an alternative for a person, because you see, as human beings, our sentiments, our emotions, they have been really, really played upon, and we feel distressed, we feel oppressed, we feel frustrated. So, although the right has been given by the Almighty that we can take revenge on equal footings, on equal terms, and if we do that, the Quran says that there is no blame on that person. Ma alayhim min sabil. And then it says, إِنَّمَا السَّبِيلُ عَلَى الَّذِينَ يَظْلِمُونَ النَّاسِ. The blame is on those people who actually oppress people. So it's not the oppressed who take revenge are to be blamed, but on the contrary, people who oppress other people, they are the ones to blame. And the verse says, وَيَبْغُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ. So the blame is only on them who oppress people and are rebellious in the land without any justification. Because when they are inciting anger and when they are inflicting greater harm on the other people, then this is something which they are guilty of spreading greater disorder. And of course, this has no justification. And then the verse says, أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. And for such people, there is great and grave penalty and a grave punishment. And then it again stresses, as it did in the beginning, وَلَمَنْ صَبَرَ وَغَفَرَ إِنَّ ذَلِكَ لَمِنْ أَزْمِ الْأُمُورِ, which means that if you exercise restraint, if you show patience and you forgive the other person, then this is indeed a matter of great resolve. This is indeed to be rewarded highly by the Almighty. Remember the first verse which says, or the first part of the verse which says, وَمَنْ أَفَا وَأَصْلَحَ فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. So the same thing has been repeated at the end, وَلَمَنْ صَبَرَ وَغَفَرَ. So a person who forgives, his reward rests with the Almighty. So we need to realize that if we forgive a person, then the huge reward that this will entail will be something which we will be given by the Almighty Himself. So this is as far as the Quranic verse is concerned, and I'd advise you that you look up this verse whenever you have the time, and you can see some of the other implications. But my purpose was to just briefly read out the text and translation of the verse, and also point out some of the ramifications, some of the implications of this verse. And the bottom line is this attitude of forgiveness that we must have for our fellow human beings, because we all need to realize that all of us as human beings are liable to sin. We are liable to make errors, and all the more reason that if other people make errors and if other people commit excesses against us, and if we want ourselves to be forgiven by the Almighty, let us develop this habit of forgiving others, to be magnanimous in forgiveness, to be people who would show grace and graciousness in forgiving others, because the way forward in life is to forgive others. You have to forgive your own self, you have to forgive your own relations, you have to always start afresh, never take offense, never think negatively, always be a positive person. A forgiving person is a positive person. He or she always looks at his own faults, at her own faults, and thinks that if I have these faults, other people can have, they have their own faults, and therefore I must concentrate on my own faults and be gracious to others in forgiving them. Now, let us go on to the next part of our session, and this basically is the hadith that we're going to discuss today. And the hadith that is being displayed before you, viewers, you can see that it is taken from the Sahih of Imam Muslim, and it again relates to something of a very common subject. It relates to our relationship with our parents. So the narrative says, An Abi Hurayrata qal, Qala rajulun, Ya Rasulullah, man haqqun nas bi husni suhba? Qala ummuka, thumma ummuka, thumma ummuka, thumma abuka, thumma adnaka adnaka. Which means that Abu Huraira reported from he actually said, a person asked the messenger of God, who amongst people is the most deserving of my good treatment? So the words are, Man haqqun nasa bi husni suhba, who is the most deserving of my good treatment? And the reply from the messenger of God was, your mother. And then again he stressed your mother. And when the third time he was asked, he again said your mother. And when he was asked the fourth time, he said the father. And after that, he said, your nearest relatives according to their order of nearness. Summa adnaka adnaka. So I'm sure you must have heard of this narrative of this hadith a number of times. And it only stresses the importance, it stresses the relationship of parenthood that we all of us possess with our parents. And it also points out the fact that the extent of significance and importance and rights which a mother has is thrice as much as the father. And we know that perhaps if a single relationship can be pointed out in which selflessness is personified, it is the mother, not even the father. Of course, there are exceptions. Fathers are many fathers are like this, but more often than not, we will find no exception in the case of mothers that they are selfless individuals. They are individuals who would like to give up their own sleep, their own comfort, their own luxury, their own food, their own assets for the comfort, luxury of their own children. They'd rather stand awake all night and attend to their children. And this, of course, is something which is inbuilt in a mother, and that's why we call her personified. She's for selflessness personified. And of course she also has the responsibility to bear the child in her womb. She carries the child for 9 months, and of course this is a period of sickness for her. She goes through a lot of problems in this pregnancy period, and then we have the time when she delivers a child, which is very, very painful, we know that. And then of course the time when she breastfeeds the child and takes care of her of the child. So this is approximately a good 2 years or 3 years in which she is entirely devoted to the upbringing of that child. And she is so attached to that child that she actually gives up all that she has simply to comfort and soothe the child. And I think this is something that, as children, all of us need to look upon and repay our mothers and fathers whenever we grow up, whenever it's time for us to look after them. That we must also realize, and we must think that what the way that they looked after us when we were in that age, when we were infants, is something which we must pay them back. And therefore, this is precisely the reason that the Prophet has said that your mother has three rights than your father. She is thrice more rightful. Her rights are three times more than the father, because, of course, although the father is always there, he is there to take care of the child. His own affection, his own love, his own care is also something of an example. But then a mother easily surpasses the father in these areas, as I've just pointed out. So the right of a parent is that we should respect him. We, on her, of course, both the parents, we should be polite with them. Even if we have to differ with them, it should be with politeness. We should think that they are more experienced and much more knowledgeable in many areas of life. But of course, this does not mean that we have to follow each and every directive of them, especially if it concerns to our own personal lives. But it is all the more reason that we have to be extremely respectful to them, even if we differ with them. We have the right to differ with them, but then this has to be done with politeness. We have the choice to choose our own careers, to choose our own spouses, and to choose our own lifestyle, whether it be social, cultural, religious, all sorts of backgrounds. But again, if this is something which is different from the choice of our parents, although we have the right to do this, but it should be done in a very polite, in a very amicable manner in which they think that their respect is not sacrificed. And of course, as the hadith has said, that summa adnaka adnaka, it's not just the case with the parents. We have this good treatment, this husnul khuluq, this good moral and this good conduct behavior has to be displayed with every single relative of our family. It is just because the mother and the father occupy special importance that they have been pointed out. Otherwise, as far as the fact is concerned that all our relations hold a lot of respect. They should hold a lot of respect for us. We must give them due regard. We must give them time. We must give them respect. We must speak to them in a way in which they think that they have been shown respect to, because this is the whole structure of the society. If the family unit is strong, if the parents feel that they are respected, if the extended family also feels that they have been given due regard, then this gives the family unit the stability that a family needs. And because of, it is the basic building block of a society. If the family unit is strong, the society is going to be strong. And if there is going to be any fissures in the family unit, of course, the society as a whole will tend to suffer. Now let's go on to the third part, and that is the Bible verse of the day. And when I say the Bible verse of the day, of course, I have chosen some of the verses which are in consonance with the Quran itself. And let me also point out this fact that a greater part of the Bible that we have today with us has teachings which are almost entirely the same as the Quran. The Quran has pointed out this at a number of places, that the Quran and the old earlier scriptures have come from the same source, and they have presented the same religion. And it is only the only edge which the Quran perhaps has on the previous scriptures is that it is preserved in its original language, the Arabic original language. We know that the original language of the Old Testament was Hebrew and that of the New Testament was Syriac. But what we have of the Old and New Testament are translations of the original. The original does not entirely survive in totality. And the translations that we have, we can see from those translations that they are quite near to the to what the Quran has said. And the distortions that we generally find in the Bible mostly relate to Bible history. We must understand the fact that the Bible, as we have it today, is not merely composed of the Torah or the Injil or the scriptures which were revealed to the prophet Moses and Jesus, respectively, but also it contains a lot of Bible history which has been authored by human beings. And since they have been authored by human beings, we have a lot of discrepancies, and the interpolation and the change that you see in the Bible mostly relates to biblical history. As far as the revealed part of the Bible is concerned, the Old and New Testament, which of course is different from what history is, we will find it in very, very close harmony and consonance with the Quran. So the text that I've chosen for you here is from the Gospel of Mark. We know it is one of the Gospels that is found in the New Testament. And the Gospel of Mark, the verse that I've selected from the Gospel of Mark is actually verse 41 to 44, and this is chapter number 12. Let me read out this verse before you. The words of this verse are, and he, Jesus, he of course refers to Jesus, took a seat by the place where the money was kept, and saw how the people put money into the boxes. A number who had wealth put in much. And there came a poor widow, and she put in two little bits of money, which make a farthing. Farthing is a unit of currency, which is a very small unit. And he made his disciples come to him and said to them, truly, I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are putting money into the box, because they all put in something out of what they have, of what they had no need for. But she, out of her need, put in all she had, even all her living. So actually, this Bible verse tells us the importance of spending, even if one has a very small amount, and even if one is in need. So the example which the prophet Jesus was trying to give his disciples here is that basically, when he asked people to spend for the cause of God, and he saw that people were putting money in the boxes, of course, which collect money. People put whatever they had, whatever surplus they had. But here came a poor widow, and she actually puts a very small amount. One farthing is a very, very small amount, a small unit of currency, and she actually put that currency into that box, which made Jesus tell his disciples that look at this poor widow. She just had this farthing. she needed this farthing, this currency for her own self. But her farthing on one side and the rest of the money which other people gave on one side, she still holds more reward because she gave this small amount because in spite of the fact that she needed that amount. And other people gave large amounts because they had those amounts in surplus. So this is a very beautiful teaching which the Prophet Jesus has actually displayed and told us that all of us must realize that at times we shy away from small amounts that we have. Many a time it happens that there are calamities, there are needs which arise in our society, but we shy away from small amounts that we have. We shy away because we think that the small amount we have is our own need, and therefore, if I give away what I need, what will happen to my own need? And this makes a person really uh, uh, feel and act as a stingy person. But here, Jesus has set the example of a poor widow who gave two bits of money which she needed. And I think that this is one of the beautiful lessons that we might all learn, and that is that we must realize that we we don't see God, we cannot touch Him, but we can experience God, and we can experience God by simply experiencing the spiritual bliss that we feel when we spend something out of our pockets which we need tomorrow. But some need comes along, and we then part with that currency with the amount that we had with our own selves. And I have seen this many a time and heard this from many people that when we spend out of our own need, it is not very long that we are rewarded from the exchequers, from the treasury of the Almighty in large numbers. And when our own need arises, we have much more than we already had. And I think this is a very fine example that Jesus has set, and it tells us that to spend in need is something of a very, very coveted nature. The Quran itself has pointed out this at one place, and it says in Surah Hashr, وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ, which means that the true believers are those who spend even when they themselves require the money that they want. They don't spend only when they have surplus money, because spending surplus money is quite easy. The beauty is that you spend when you do not have surplus. The money that you have is of your own need, and you still do that. So this brings us to an end to this first session in which we have discussed a verse of the Quran, a hadith, and some verses from the Bible. And if you have any questions, let's proceed with these questions. Otherwise, in the next session, we'll take up some of the misconceptions regarding Islam.
So we have a question from Rafiq Khaja Saiba. Please unmute your mic and go ahead.
Aslan Dasab, my question is a different one. I have a relative.
Could you speak a little louder, please? I'm not being able to hear you.
My question is, a relative of mine who lives in USA divorced her husband years ago under the American law. Now her husband wants to remarry her, and he has been told by some imam that since he didn't divorce her under the Islamic law, she's still his wife. Is she not supposed to marry someone else, divorce him, and then can remarry the first husband? Could you please clarify this matter?
Well, I would request you if you could discuss this me in person over a WhatsApp call, because this needs some more discussion and also needs some of the statements from both these spouses, the way the things happen. So it would be much more easier if we could converse regarding this matter once this class is over, maybe, or tomorrow. Some more details would be needed to give an opinion.
Okay, can I ask another question? Allah gives hidayah to whomever He wants. Then is it possible that even if one tries hard, one will not get this hidayah from Allah?
Well, verses which mention this law of providing guidance to human beings actually have generally been misinterpreted, because some of the translations give this impression as if the Almighty is saying that it is His prerogative that He may guide people or not, and that In this prerogative, he has the choice of depriving people from guidance or providing them with guidance, whereas this is not the case. The Quran has explained that this law of guidance, actually, in which the Almighty says that He'll provide guidance to whomsoever He wants to, is not that He's going to provide guidance and deprive other people out of His own choice. These verses actually tell us that providing guidance is the prerogative of the Almighty and not of the idols that these people are worshipping. So the context of this is that it is the Almighty who provides guidance, not these idols, not these deities that you worship. It is whenever he intends to provide guidance, these idols are not going to stop him. These deities that you people worship, you idolaters worship, they are not going to stop him. And then at another place, the Quran also says that this providing guidance is based on the law that a person who wishes for guidance and he also gives due regard to the guidance that is already found in his own self, his innate self. For example, our own human conscience, our human nature, we have the innate guidance from the Almighty. We know what right and wrong is. So the Almighty says that He will provide guidance to only those people who actually give due regard to the guidance they already have in the form of their own conscience and their human nature. So there are 2 points that need to be understood. First, that when the Almighty says that He'll provide guidance to whomsoever He wishes, He's actually negating the fact that other people will not provide guidance. These deities which the idolaters, the mushrikun would go to, they are not going to provide guidance. It is I who is going to provide guidance. And the second thing is that this providing guidance is not based on some whim. It is based on a particular law, and that is people who care and give due regard to the guidance that they already have, they will be further guided by the Almighty.
Can I ask one more question, please? In Surah Qiyamah, it is mentioned that the people who go to Jannat will be given purified sharab. Now, did Allah have to mention this when sharab was originally considered an evil and was banned?
You see, the word sharab in Arabic means drink. In Urdu language, the word sharab actually means alcohol or liquor. In the Arabic language, sharab means something which is drunk. It's like a drink. It is anything which you drink. And the Quran had to make this specification because usually drinks in the times of the Prophet himself and even today, people think that the only drink that they can really feel excited from and lose all their worries is the liquor and the alcohol that they drink. So the Quran clarified that they'll be given pure things to drink, and these pure things will also not intoxicate them. They'll not inebriate them. They'll not make them lose their senses. On the contrary, they'll be very, very refreshing to the taste buds. They'll be very refreshing to drink. So the sharab or the liquor that the Quran is talking about is actually something of a drink which does not have the characteristics of the drink that we think in our own world is the drink that provides us with a lot of comfort by making us intoxicated. So that is why the Quran says it is sharab tahur, it is pure drink, and whenever you drink it, it'll be ecstasy and bliss for you, and you'll not become inebriated, nor will you lose your senses.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. I have another question from Yasin Fahad Saiba. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. I have a question about parents. Like, what if a father has left his children when they were very young? The mother raised them by herself. He didn't look back, didn't care, didn't do his responsibilities. Then he comes back after 30, 35 years and wants to contact his children and talk to them. So I want to know, is it obligatory on the children to request and meet with him, or talk with him, or can they just choose to not to? No disrespect if they don't want to talk to him because he was never there for them. What would be their attitude for children? Like, what should they do?
I think this is again a situational question. It all depends on the circumstances which were there in the background. Maybe the husband has some, maybe, although it's a very slim chance, he has some valid reason. and they're still married, of course, unless legally they make this legal procedure complete and they get divorced. In the absence of any divorce, the children are still his children. Even after divorce, they will remain his children. And if he has been a bad father or a bad parent, it again reflects badly on his part. But as far as the children are concerned, they should try to maintain a reasonable relationship with him. They might not love him, but still they have to respect him, and also think of the reason that might have been the, the thing behind his absence. So, as I
No,
said, that
if I can just interrupt, he was very abusive of their mother, and they've seen that as the child. So it's not really easy for them to have a relationship with him now. Like,
well, as I said, even if he has been abusive to the mother, he's still their father. So he has a certain right on their children. And uh, the minimum of that right is that they should at least, when they meet each other, they should greet each other properly. It's not that they are required to stay with him or start even loving him, because this is something which comes out of the heart. But as far as the right of a father is concerned, the minimum right is that respect should be shown to him, which means that he should be properly greeted and properly treated. And if he is in some distress or some difficulty, if at all, he could be helped. So the basic human rights should be there. But again, question of loving him or being very, very super affectionate to him is not something which is required in such instances. But as I said, basic human rights should still be discharged.
okay, thank you.
Um, Dr. Shah, I have another question from Rafiq Khaja Saiba. Would you like to move and take the questions at the end, or you go ahead and take them?
Yes, I think that let's take the remaining questions at the end. And what I'll do is that discuss some of the misconceptions that I had in mind today to discuss. And at the end, then you can go on and ask various questions.
Thank you. So we'll continue, inshallah. Thank you.
Okay. So the misconception I wanted to discuss, some of which actually there are a couple of misconceptions. They basically relate to some of the issues which the Quran, which relate to the Quran directly, and which have become misconceptions because of our own limited knowledge of what the Quran is all about and the style of the Quran and the way it speaks to us. It's quite different from what we are used to. And the first misconception about the Quran that I'd like to discuss is that the way we know that the Quran is divided into 114 surahs, and each surah has a name. So we have Surah Fatiha, which is the first surah, we have Surah Baqarah, the second one, the third is Al Imran, and so on. And when we read the Quran and we read the name of a surah, the thing which immediately comes to our mind is that the surah name reflects the content of a surah, because that's how we are used to. For example, if we read a book of psychology and we know the title says Essentials of Psychology, and or any other book, for example, if book on literature. So more often than not, the books that we are used to, they always reflect the contents, the title of the book. Whenever I read a book, especially on a subject, the title tells me what's going to be inside. This is not the case with the Quran. Not always the case with the Quran. And that is, the name of a surah is not always reflective of the contents of the surah. Now, for example, a very prominent example is Surah Nisa, which means a surah which was revealed regarding women. Now, in this whole corpus of this surah, which is about 100 plus verses, there are about 5 or 10 verses, maybe slightly more, regarding women. And hence, it can hardly be classified as the total content of the surah. So, when we say Surah Nisa, the idea that comes to our mind would be that it will be a surah in which women will be discussed from the very beginning, and all sorts of issues which relate to women will be brought up and then discussed in various manners, and ultimately at the end we'll have a summary of the directives. This is because we are used to the type of books and chapters in which the titles reflect the content. First, let me clarify that the names of the surah have been seldom kept by the Almighty Himself. They were kept by the Sahaba and at times by the Prophet. And these names were kept on the Arab tradition in which at times a part of the surah or something interesting in that surah would assume the name of the surah. A very interesting example is the name of Surah Baqarah. Now, Surah Baqarah, Baqarah in Arabic means the cow. The whole surah relates to the history of the Israelites, the way they had, the way they were formed in the beginning, instituted in the beginning, the exodus that they did, and settled all the way in various territories. There's just one single verse or a few verses, two verses, which mention an incident of the cow. And the whole surah has been named as Baqarah. Isn't that something of an anomaly in our own scenario? Yes, it is. But then we need to realize that this is now not how Arabs used to keep the names. They would not name surahs on the based entirely on the content. They would rather name a surah on a very, at times, a very small incident which was found, but it would be very peculiar. It would be very, very strange to them. So the cow verse or the Baqarah verse in Surah Baqarah, there are 286 verses of Surah Baqarah, and just a couple of verses which deal with this cow incident. Because this incident was something of a very novel nature, that the name was kept as Surah Baqarah. So the naming of the surahs, we need to understand, is not because they reflect the content of the surah, but because they reflect part of some novelty which is found, or something which stands out in the surah. Another example is Surah Nur. We know that Surah Nur has a lot of directives which relate to the society. It gives us the directives of adultery. It gives us directives about adultery and fornication, and amputation of hands, and many other things. And similarly, it gives us the decorum and the norms of gender interaction. And then there is this verse of Nur, which is called Ayah Nur, Allahu Nur Samawati wal Ard, after which the surah is named as Surah Nur. Now that Nur verse or Nur verses have little to do with the whole theme of the surah. It's a small, compact area of the surah. But Arabs have this distinction, this tradition in which they name surahs after some part of the surah. So let us be focused in this, and let us be more aware of the fact that the Quranic surahs, if we try to find out the name, or if it reflects the content, it will not do that in most cases. In most cases. There are a few exceptions, but in most cases, it will not reflect the content. And they have not been actually named to reflect the content, because this was not how the Arabs used to do. Part of this issue I'd like to discuss here as well is that there are some surahs which are named through abbreviated letters like Alif Lam Mim, or Ha Mim Ain Sin Qaf, or Alif Lam Ra. These are also names of the surah. We need to understand that as far as some surahs are concerned, which I just pointed out, like Surah Taha, or like Surah Maryam, or Surah Baqarah, or Surah Al Imran, they have been named by the Sahaba, mostly by the Sahaba. However, surahs which begin with these abbreviated letters like Alif Lam Mim, or like Hamim and Sin Qaf, or Hamim, these are surahs which have been named by the Almighty Himself, and these are actually the names of the surah. So Alif Lam Mim is actually the Quranic name of Surah Baqarah, or the Almighty's name given to Surah Baqarah. The Sahaba named it as Baqarah, and the Almighty called it Alif Lam Mim. So these are both names of the surah themselves, of surah itself. And as to the fact that why is a surah named like this, Alif Lam Mim, or for example, Noon wal Qalam. So if we try to study ancient scriptures and ancient Egyptology, in which alphabets actually reflected certain letters, we'll find out, as has been done by one of the premier scholars of the subcontinent, Imam Hamiduddin Farahi, that ancient alphabets represented certain figures, and these figures were responsible for the fact that a surah would be named so. Now we know the word Noon in Arabic, or in ancient alphabet, refers to a fish, and we know that the incident of the fish is mentioned in Surah Qalam, right at the end, when the Prophet is said, when he's asked, "Fala takun kasahibil hut, fasbir li hukmi rabbika," that he has to fasbir li hukmi rabbika, wala takun kasahibil hut, that you have to show perseverance until the decree of God arrives, and he must not be like the companion of the fish, which of course is Jonah. And hut, we know in Arabic, is fish. So we know that the word noon actually is some which represents a fish as well, and in the ancient terminology, it signified a fish. So this is another aspect that we need to understand, that at times these huruf muqatta'at, or the abbreviated letters, they are named the surahs, and the reason that they have been named so is again because the letters that they represent have some linkage to some incident or some part which is mentioned in that particular surah. Another example is Taha. Now, the word Ta in ancient alphabet actually represents a serpent, a snake. And we know that the incident of the serpent and the snake is mentioned in the tale of Moses when he was actually confronting the Pharaoh in that famous context. So the reason that these surahs are named so is again because the harf, or the letter, or the abbreviated letter, has some bearing on some incident which occurs in that surah. But again, it has been named in the same manner as I said before, that it is named after some particular incident which might stand out. It will not reflect the whole of the surah, the content of the whole of the surah, but the part of just part of it. So this was the misconception, or this background information that I wanted to give today to you, that we need to understand that the Quranic surahs have not been named the way we would name our books or chapters or the things that we write. They have been named in an entirely different way. And as I said, this is peculiar to the Arabs, and the Almighty stuck to that particular tradition of the Arabs. So I now come to the end of this session, and will invite you to ask any questions that you might have.
Before we take questions, I'll take Rafia Khaja Sahiba's question first because she's been waiting. But the only thing I would like to mention is that, I mean, we understand that you can have personal questions which may need to be discussed in private. Shehzad Saab is open to taking a call. He has a WhatsApp number on his mobile number. From you, I only ask that because of the time difference considerations and other considerations, instead of calling him directly, you at least send a message and set up a time if you need to discuss anything with him after legislation. Thank you. Rafia Saiba, if you still have a question, you can unmute your mic. I see the. Thank you.
My question is, what was the sin committed by Hawa and Adam? The story goes it's eating the forbidden fruit, but I don't follow this. So could you explain this, please?
Right. So if we study the incident of Adam and Eve in various surahs of the Quran, in particular the one which is mentioned in Surah Taha, it was said that they were of course husband and wife, but in a particular situation that where they were kept in an orchard, they were told that they should not come near each other and procreate or copulate. And that is the reason that in a very subtle way, the Quran says, La takraba hazihi shajara. It actually meant the family tree, or the tree which is responsible for producing the family. And Adam was told that he should not come near his wife. And we know that this particular incitement or reward that was promised by Satan when he missed Adam and Eve, he actually promised them. He said that if you eat this, of course, which is a metaphor, it is no physical fruit, which was actually implied. It's a metaphor of coming. It said that you will, which of course meant procreates Eve, he will have his generation of and become and multiply. And then he said that this is something which God has stopped you from, because if you do so, you'll become angels, or you'll become someone who has eternal life. Again, as I said, that this is something which is very, very clear, because as soon as Adam tasted the fruit of Eve, which of course their private parts became known to each other, and they began covering their private parts out of shame. So this forbidden fruit actually is a metaphor. It does not relate to the fruit of good and evil as is reflected by some of the biblical scholars. Neither is it the fruit of any olive or any physical fruit. It is basically a metaphor for procreation. And basically, Adam and Eve were stopped from this act of procreation to come near each other because the Almighty wanted to demonstrate some of His scheme that was meant for them to be conveyed. So, if you want more details, you can look up the commentaries of Amin Hassan Islahi and Javed Ahmad Ghamidi, especially in the relevant verses of Surah Taha. They have explained how these verses actually metaphorically refer to the family tree or to the tree which comes into being after procreation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. I have a question from Shehzad. Please unmute your mic.
Yeah, I'm a bit confused about the what you said about the names of the surahs that the companions refer to as that. So I understand the companions refer to it with those names, but why did we adopt those names? Like, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you said, has the other names for the surahs like Alif Lam Mim and Alif Lam Ra, then how did it happen that the names chosen by the companions became the basis on which we divide the chapters of the Quran? Like, I'm just a bit confused there.
Well, actually, this was not much of an issue to Arabs and to the Prophet himself, because naming a surah in any case never had any impact, because it can only have an impact if it reflects the contents. When it does not reflect the contents, then a surah can have multiple names. So it's like having more than one name for the same unit. We also keep names of our children. We keep them out of our own love and respect. At times we have two names. Some of them are pet names, and some of the names which are kept lovingly for each other. So as far as the Quran is concerned, I'm not comparing these pet names to the Quran, but what I'm trying to say is that at times the names don't become that much of an issue, and one particular entity is called by different names. So Alif Lam Mim was the name of Surah Baqarah, which the Almighty gave, and Surah Baqarah itself was the name from which this surah came to be known. And if you study not ancient, but our earliest tafsirs, exegesis of the Quran, you'll find out that they have been called by both these names, and having multiple names of the same unit of the same surah is not of an issue and not a problem.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. If anyone else has a question, you can click on the hand icon and I will open your mic. Go ahead, Rafi.
Dr. Shehzad, so I understand from you that getting hidayat from Allah depends on our own performance, and if we perform well and if we try hard, then He'll give us hidayat. And if we ignore His commands and we don't try, then He will close our heart. Is this correct?
Precisely, this is correct. The Quran, the Almighty says that He'll deprive us from guidance or hidayat only when we show negligence and we neglect the guidance that we already have. You see, there is this innate guidance all of us have as human beings. We know what the truth is. We know what justice is. These universal human values that we have, and we acknowledge all of them. They are part of the innate guidance which all human beings have been given. So if we act out of respect to justice and to all positive values, and we give due regard to that guidance, the Almighty says He will increase our guidance. He'll guide us even more. But if we don't give due regard to the guidance that we already have, the innate guidance, for example, if we start lying or we start cheating people and we start going against our conscience, then the Almighty says that as a punishment, He'll deprive us of further guidance. And we'll start doing bad things as if they are good for us. We lose distinction between good and bad things. So this is basically the same thing as the Quran says that He puts seals on our heart, which means that He does not let good enter into it. This is not something which is done out of just a whim, but on the basis of this law that people who do not give regard to the guidance that they have, they are ultimately deprived of this.
The other thing is that Ghamdi Sahib has explained that this life is a life totally of trial, But some people's trials are much more than others. And even some good people, their trials are continuously there. How do we explain this?
Well, you see, is something which is a universal phenomena, and this is a relative thing when we say that some people are tested much more than the others, because you never know the situation of other people. They might be even more badly tested, but it's just a question that at times we see the apparent form of a person and we think that he is living in good circumstances. So this trial is part and parcel of the scheme of the Almighty, and it's not just human beings. If you study the lives of the prophets, you'll find out the way that they were tested and tried. Our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself, the trial that he went through when he was in Mecca and in Taif, we know that the tribulations that he had to go through. Read what Job or the Prophet Ayub had to go through. Read what the Prophet Moses had to go through. Read what Jesus had to go through at the hands of the Jews. So these trials were very severe on our prophets, and the Quran even says, "Hatta zuzilu, mata nasrullah," that the people would say they will be jolted by these trials, and they would cry out that when is the help of God going to arrive? So, as I said, this is something which is part of our of the scheme of the Almighty. At times, it seems that some people are tried more, but this is not the case. A person is tried according to his own capacity. The Almighty does not burden the person beyond his capacity, and whenever that capacity finishes, the trial also generally finishes. But at times, if the trial is of the form of punishment because of some of our own evil deeds, then of course that's an exception. But the bottom line is that these trials, these tribulations, this test is part of each and every person's life.
And we have to just do sabr while this happens?
Yes, they have to exercise patience and perseverance and also keep counting their blessings. You see, whenever you are tried and tested, we forget the good times that we had. We forget the uh, uh, the good aspects that we enjoy of life. In spite of being in trial, we are able to eat, we are able to sleep at times, we are able to have a meal, we are able to dress, we have shelter. We don't realize that 30% of the world population is living below poverty line. So, in spite of this, we this fact, of course, we have to show patience and sabr. But the key to patience is again to keep counting our blessings and to keep enjoying the fact that we have been blessed a lot by the Almighty. And if we are going through these tough times today, of course, there were good times in the past as well. So, in those testing times, we must not forget the good times of our past.
Thank you very much.
Uh, we have about 7 minutes remaining. We'll take Yasin Pansaba's question next. Please unmute your mic.
Um, I asked you in a previous class about the seafood halal and haram thing, and you told me that I should teach my kids the basic principle. And I did try that. I told them to research and see, how they catch their prey and stuff. And my son was looking about a lobster for an hour on the internet, and he was very confused. And he said, "Mom, it's really hard to decide. I don't know if, I can eat this lobster or not. And I really like it. And can you tell me?" So I tried to research with him, and I told him that I think it's okay, but he was concerned because at some place it said that the lobster eats, sometimes it eats other lobsters and sometimes it eats dead meat. So we were confused, even I was confused. So I mean, if you can just help us with in this respect, because he was very specific about the lobster and the shrimp. So I don't know, I tried it too, but it sometimes really gets hard to understand how these animals catch their prey and how they eat them. Plus,
So,
I was
as
concerned
far as
too
lobster,
because, sorry, in land animals, we don't eat the ones which eat meat. But it apparently seemed like that even all the fishes would eat the other fishes, the smaller ones. So that's why I was more confused.
so the first thing that we need to understand is just not the issue of eating meat. That's not just the case of eating meat that an animal is prohibited. It's the way that meat is eaten. They either tear apart their prey from their incisors, their large teeth, or from their claws, which they have on their feet or their hands. So tearing apart the prey and then gobbling up his meat, that these two things, they make up the entity what we call as carnivorous animals. They just don't eat meat. They actually tear apart prey in a savage way. So that is the analogy in case of sea animals as well. So a lobster or a shrimp is okay as far as I'm concerned, because they don't tear apart their prey. They might eat meat. So if you need to tell your child, and or of course research more, that when you find out regarding sea animals, it's not just the issue of eating meat, it's the way how they eat meat, whether they tear apart their prey or is it that they just swallow the prey which comes to them. So basically, it's
Okay.
this savagery which is prohibited.
Okay, so but I was confused a bit because I thought when we come to land animals, we only eat the ones who eat grass, right? Who are grass fed normally. That's what we
That's
follow.
generally the case, right?
Okay, so but
But we know
in the
that
animals
there
per
are some
se,
animals, who also eat meat. If they are given meat, they eat meat. But generally, they don't eat. You're right about that. But at times, when you domesticate animals and we start giving them meat, they start eating meat as well. So it's not a rule of thumb, as I would say. The rule of thumb is that the animal has to be a savage beast in which he tears apart his prey and consumes his meat.
okay, so then it's okay if the big fishes, like the
Yeah,
ones we eats the small fishes as their food, they swallow it with water and
that's
whatever.
it. Right.
Okay, okay. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
So these are all the questions we had. We can end the
Okay.
class 4 minutes early. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, inshallah, see you next week then.